Welcome to another weekly Melting Pot episode. Today I'm in conversation with Rashantha Devanesan. Rashantha is based in Singapore. She's a jewelry designer and she founded a jewelry brand in 2009, which is called Kadambari Jewels or Jewelry. And I'm so happy to be talking to Rashantha today. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Payal.
So, so just a little bit about you before we actually, start talking about your absolutely exquisite jewelry and how that came about. So, a little bit about yourself. Where are you from originally, and how long have you been in Singapore? And did designing jewelry come to you organically, or is it something that you have studied in the past? So just a little background to you would be great.
Great. So, Payal, I am from Sri Lanka originally, born there, spent the first 12 years of my life there. And then I moved to Bangalore to boarding school at Bishop Cotton's. My sister and I went on to do my university in Chennai, got married to my husband, who's also from Sri Lanka, but who was studying at IIT Bombay at that time. We got married and then also spent the next 12 years in India, where our children were born. And so as I think everybody knows, India has played a very, very big part in our lives. Although we do go back to Sri Lanka very often because that's still home, but we also combine it with going to India. Now, career-wise, I started off as a marine insurance executive way back before I got married, that was. And then there was this upheaval in Sri Lanka, the race riots, which is when we returned to India. Didn't do anything much in India as such. It was just bringing up the kids and all that sort of thing. Came to Indonesia in 91 and I started teaching in school and did a master's in education. So when I moved to Singapore in 1995, I started teaching here in high school. Did that for a bit, but it wasn't really my calling. I used to paint sort of sporadically, but I wasn't a very handiwork kind of person. So the jewelry thing was a very organic thing that came about. I went to Brazil in 2007 with my husband, who was on a project there. And I found a lot of my friends who were there were already beading and doing things like that. And I started painting actually, because Brazil, the churches, the colors, it was all amazing. And so we would all sit together and I would do a watercolor. They would be making some jewelry and I'd give them a watercolor. They'd give me a necklace. It sort of started like that. And then I kind of got hooked, strung a few things and, asked my friend to finish it off for me. And one day she just said, you need to learn how to do this. And actually, it is just a matter of finishing off the edges of a necklace. And what you do in the middle is all up to you. So it started like that. And then suddenly I realized that there was all this beautiful silver in India, which I hadn't really looked at before. And so I started doing a lot of old Indian jewelry in the beginning, collecting old antique pieces, putting them together in a slightly more contemporary way. And then it went on, yes.
Where were you collecting from while you were traveling within India? Or
yes. Okay. While I was traveling, and that brought me in contact with the first Indian charity that I started working with, iIndia in Jaipur. And we still do a lot of work with them, my husband and I, and a lot of the profits from my sales support the work they do with street children, rescuing of street children. So initially it was, I would travel to India to work with India a little bit, design for their vocational centers, pick up all the little bits and pieces I needed. And then I suddenly sort of started reading about things, because my interest is in jewelry is not so much the adornment part, but what it actually meant, because old jewelry had meanings far beyond looking pretty or making somebody look pretty. It was worn for different reasons: protection, status, all kinds of things. And then, sort of I went into looking at Afghani jewelry, the Kachi and the Banjara, and then the Hazara, which is so different, because again, you found a lot of that in India. And little by little, then I moved on to reading about Moroccan jewelry, mainly because it's so different from Indian jewelry. You see,
how is it different?
Well, this is the thing. The Indian subcontinent has had influence in so many ways on surrounding geographical regions. If you look at Oman, if you look at even Yemen, there's a strong link between India, the designs, the techniques. And Morocco, for some reason, is very different. I think it's because the tribes were all in the Atlas Mountains with very little outside links. And although Marrakesh was a big trade route, it was an offshoot from sort of the Silk Road that went into Iran. And maybe there wasn't that much of an Indian influence there, because it is really, really very different. So I was fascinated with Moroccan jewelry. I traveled there twice.
So is the material different? Is the designing of the jewelry different?
The material a lot of the time is silver, because gold, except in the north, which was in Meknes and places like that, and were strongly influenced by Europe and Egypt, gold was not a big part of tribal Moroccan jewelry. Tribal Moroccan jewelry was worn for many reasons. And I'm going to now hold up this little piece here, which is, now the shape of this is what they call the Tanit. So the Tanit was an ancient goddess of the Moroccan, the Berber people. But when they all became Islamic, they were not allowed to wear images and things like that. So this shape, this little head and the body, which is there in their weaving, it's there in their printing, it's there in their jewelry at some point, is the representative of Tanit.
Okay.
And then again, you have the Kamsa, the hand. So that again was a Jewish tradition, because most of the silversmiths in early Morocco were Jewish.
Yeah, because you find that in Israel. So
yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So they called it the hand of Miriam. And in Morocco and in Turkey, it's called the hand of Fatima, the sister of Muhammad, the prophet. So basically, it's a sign. It's worn for protection, and a lot of the time, it's also worn at the back. There's a long strand hanging with this kamsa at the back, because it protects you when you're walking in front from people behind you who might have evil intentions. So a lot of these things are so interesting when you go into reading about old jewelry. And I think that's what fascinates me most. And my first exhibition also came on very organically when I went to London. 2009, yes, or 2008 actually. Took something for a friend of mine, and she works at the British Council. So she wore it in the morning and everybody loved it. So she just called me and said, "You have any more? Because people, really, really like it." I said, "I have about 3 or 4. So she said, "Can you part with them?" I said, "Yeah, I don't mind." And she sold them all within about 2 hours. They were much simpler at that time to what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
And she was working with a Sri Lankan charity which looked after deaf and blind children, the small deaf and blind schools in Sri Lanka. So she asked me, she said, "Would you like to come next year to London, and whenever you come, do a little exhibition for our charity?" And I said, "Sure." So that was my first exhibition, and something told me that probably that was what it was meant to be. So all the shows that I have support a charity. All the profits go to that charity. I only take my costs back. So usually it's about 45% of the entire take. And right now I have about 5 or 6 charities on my list, which I support regularly. One is the Deaf and Blind Aid one, and one is I India in Jaipur. But then I have had a lot of other charities come forward for help at various times, and I have supported them. In Singapore, it is the Children's Hospice at KK Hospital. So I do that for them usually once a year when I have my Singapore show. And the best part of it is, Payal, it gives me something to do. It's something I love doing. Hours go when, I working with all these things. And I also now have people in all these places who have again organically turned up, who provide me with a lot of the stuff. I don't need to travel as much. So that's in a nutshell.
Where do you, so where, so obviously you do all the designing. So the creative is all done by you.
Yeah.
And so, but where are the artisans? Where, which,
This is me. The artisan is me as well. I'm just going to show you my workbench, which is very messy, but that's where everything happens. So
okay.
I have nobody who puts these together for me or does any work for me.
Oh.
I do it all myself. So, and I think that's the nicest part. So this area that you see here is where I work. It's very messy. So what I usually do is, I lost you again there. Okay. So what I usually do is I pull out the pendant that I'm going to use. Sometimes I pull out multiple pendants and put them up around me, pick out the beads I need, and sometimes I pick something out and I work with it. Sometimes there's one hanging around that does.
So typically, how long would it take you to say, once you've had the creative idea in your head, how long would it take you to put, say, a piece of a necklace together? And again, do you only do, do you do bracelets and earrings and necklaces and all of that? And what is it that you prefer to work with more than the other?
I actually, I prefer to do necklaces, maybe because I wear a lot of them. And so that's what interests me most. So most of the time what I do are necklaces, and they can typically take anything between an hour to 2 or 3 hours if it's very complicated. Sometimes a necklace just falls together without a lot of effort. It just seems to want to know what it wants to go with. And
Okay.
sometimes I sort of pick and change and move it around quite a bit. I only do earrings and bracelets just before a show because I know that people come looking for them, and because I need to sell enough in order to give away whatever I need to. So I just do a whole brace of earrings and bracelets. I do have some old bangles which I source. That's the only thing I source and sell without having any work done by me.
Okay.
The old bangles. But yeah, bracelets and earrings are usually I do just before a sale.
Okay.
I don't pick something out and think, oh, I'll do a pair of earrings. It's almost always a necklace.
Okay. And so you mentioned beads, you mentioned silver. So
Mm.
what is the main sort of uh, things that you work with, or do you also work with other stones like, the more exquisite stones like rubies or sapphires or whatever?
I did start with rubies, sapphires, aquamarines, things like that. But as my jewelry seems to have moved more into like an organic tribal kind of design, I use less. I use a lot of amber. I use a lot of a resin that is very much like amber, but not as expensive, but also very old. They don't make that any, I mean, it's not around a lot now, called copal. And I use lapis and turquoise a lot, and agates. So I also source a lot of ancient beads. So I have a lot of ancient agates. I use coral quite a bit.
Okay. And
So
where do you source these from?
depends. Now the corals, I have some coral from India, but the Mediterranean corals are what I use more of.
Oh,
And the amber, again, I don't use Baltic amber as much, the transparent one. I use more the butterscotch one, which is usually available in North Africa, Mali, Morocco, that region. And then I have this other resin, which is actually a phenolic resin, which was made in the 1920s out of bakelite. And that was used by a lot of the poorer tribes who couldn't afford the amber. But it is an amazing looking bead. You can't, I mean, if somebody told me it was amber, I wouldn't know the difference, except that the hardness is different. Amber is very hard, whereas this, they say, is, can break, but it looks exactly like amber. So I use a lot with the phenolic resin, and I'm very careful to say it is in a lot of my work, because amber is now so expensive that it just drives up the cost of the necklace so much.
right.
So yeah.
So what is special in Sri Lanka? What are the different stones or beads that are very, very unique to Sri Lanka?
See,
And
Sri Lanka has a lot of the sapphires and those sort of stones, which I don't use a lot of.
okay, okay.
Plus, in Sri Lanka, they do not drill for beads. So even if you get Sri Lankan ruby beads, there are beads that have been bought in Sri Lanka, taken to Jaipur and drilled there.
Hmm,
So, so Sri Lanka does not, they do more of the gemstones for setting.
I
But I
see.
have also sourced some old silver from Sri Lanka, which is again very rare because it's not worn today. Like in India, we still wear the same kind of silver jewelry even today. But
Mhm.
Sri Lankans have stopped. And so it's mostly in the Kandy area, the Kandy and silver. Um, when I was there, I never paid any attention to it. And now I find all these European like friends and contacts of mine in the jewelry world who are going gaga over these. And I've managed to then go back and like root around and find a few pieces. But I think the best has already gone.
Hmm. Yeah.
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 Yes.
Wow, it's quite interesting. So you're basically a one-man show, one-woman show,
Absolutely. Yes.
and yeah, it's fascinating to be able, and I think the satisfaction that you must get, because right from sourcing it to creating it, designing it, and then ultimately putting it together as a final piece of jewelry must be so satisfying for you. How, you know, and obviously there is a purpose behind it, because as you mentioned,
Yeah.
you give back, and that's really the objective. But
Yeah.
time that you've created a piece of jewelry, which you're doing, on an ongoing basis, what do you ever like have that personal connect with a piece of jewelry where you're reluctant to part with it because of multiple reasons? Maybe it's come out absolutely spectacular, maybe during the process you got very attached to it, maybe it's something that's caught your eye. I don't know. Is it, do you go through that at any point in time where you get really attached to I'm not saying it from a material point of view.
No, I know.
As
And it happens. It absolutely happens. But sometimes it's not for the more spectacular pieces. And I have to confess, I kind of take them upstairs when I think, oh, I'm going to keep this. And very often there are pieces which I have taken up to my personal stash and I haven't really worn. And then after a while I go through them and I think this needs to go back down again.
Hmm.
And yes, you're very right. There are some pieces that even if I don't wear, um, I feel, a little pang when it goes. They're all very personal to me because when I'm working with them, I think it's a kind of a meditation in a way. My thoughts just sort of move. And there have been two instances where people who bought a necklace from me said that it made them feel very good whenever they wore it. One was this lady in England who came for one of my shows. She was a doctor, had just got married, I think, and was pregnant, but it was a late pregnancy. She was 40 something. Anyway, there was this piece that I really loved. And I said, look, I'm not going to sell it. And my husband said, why don't you just put it out and put a price on it? If it goes, it goes. If it doesn't, it's yours. And I did that. And this girl bought it. And I thought, okay, well, whatever. The next year, she came back for my show with her baby. And she told me that she said she wanted to speak to everyone who was there. And I said, yeah, sure. We had about 20 people milling around. And she said she went through a very difficult pregnancy because she was older and she had issues and problems and she felt depressed. And she said the last month of her pregnancy, she wore this necklace almost all the time. And it made her feel so good. And I think for me, that was something that makes it all really, really
Worth.
worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
letting that go.
Yeah.
And there have been a couple of others who have also said, we feel really good wearing your jewelry. And I think that's because a lot of people make beautiful jewelry. I'm not the only one out there. So it also makes you feel good when people say, yeah, there's something about your work that makes us feel good. And
You know,
oh, that,
I feel that it's the labor of love, and somehow even though it's the piece of jewelry doesn't really speak, because it's at the end of the day, it's something that's material, but
yeah,
it's the love and the labor that you put into it, somehow creates that expression. And it's probably, that's probably what it is. It just happens unknowingly, but
yeah,
it
yeah.
does. Yeah.
I think it's energies,
It's
sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I can completely understand that. And yeah, and it's quite fascinating. So your journey, continues with this whole process. Where, what else do you do outside of creating these masterpieces? And that's what I'm going to call them, because I've gone onto your website and I've looked at them.
Okay.
Quite stunning. So, what else do you do outside of that?
Well, it's just now my husband and me here. We have two dogs whom we love, and the newest one is a puppy, and she's really, I realized I'm really too old to have a puppy. It's like having a 2-year-old running around, but she keeps us busy.
Right.
I've missed my children who are away. I have a son in London who is a doctor and has two little boys. And I have a daughter in the States who's a lawyer. And this year and a half, we haven't really seen each other at all. But I'm hoping to go on the 15th to London. And then I think she will come over. So, bit of a pang because I have sort of children to leave here as well. But
Yeah,
I
that's
think I'm going to do it anyway, I hope.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, my time just goes with with that, I have a few friends that belong. I love to read, so I have a couple of book clubs I belong to, and yes, more than that, I don't think I do much with my life, really.
No, but I think all power to you for the fact that you put in so much effort into creating, and more importantly, not using the profits from it to give back to the various communities, which I think is phenomenal. So thank you so much, Rashantha, for talking to me. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and wish you all the very best. And I hope.
Thank you, Payal. Thank you for having me here. And yes, it's been a pleasure talking to you as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to get onto your website and have a closer look at some of the accessories which I already have an eye on. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Payal.
Okay.
Have a great day today.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye.